All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with the last logistics speech, and then we'll go ahead and start the webinar right at 8. Just want to welcome everyone to the Sandy Hook Promise webinar series. And again, due to the amount of callers that we're anticipating having on the webinar, if you could just take a minute and go to the GoToMeeting panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and go ahead and mute yourself using the microphone button if you're calling in from a computer. If you're calling in from a landline or a cell phone, if you could press the mute button on your phone, or if you press *6, this will help the quality of the call as we're recording today. Also, if you have any questions, we want your feedback. If you go, again, to the GoToMeeting panel and type in the chat bar, if you type to everyone, we'll get those questions as they come in. We'll use that during our question and answer portion of the call today. Please type your name if your name is not already spelled out, the location you're from, and any questions that you have. And again, we'll cover those questions during the end of the call today. Also, we will not be using the webcam or video portion at any point during the call today. So if you do have that selected, just make sure that your webcam is not on. If you do accidentally put your webcam on, I'll be sure to close that out for you. We'll go ahead and get started here at 8 o'clock. If you have any questions, again, feel free to type in the chat box here. And just make sure that you mute yourself. If you do have any technical assistance questions as far as the webinar, if you're having trouble hearing, if you can't see the screen, or anything like that, we've provided the number. So if you use the number 1-800-646-0014 and enter the meeting ID 267-991-333, they will be able to help you with any technical assistance questions that you have. I've also provided some of this information in the chat box, so if you need to refer back to the number at any time, that will be at the top of the chat box in the GoToMeeting tab panel. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to National Field Director Paula Sinbo to go over the agenda for tonight. And again, please just make sure that you have muted on your phone by pressing *6 or the mute option on your phone, or that you have muted yourself manually on your computer. Thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our May webinar for Promise Leaders. We're excited to have so many of you from all across the country joining us tonight. The voice that you're hearing right now, this is Paula Sinbo, National Field Director with Sandy Hook Promise. And I'm going to briefly walk through what to expect on tonight's webinar. We will be recording this webinar so you can listen to it at a later time as well. Nicole Hockley will be joining us, and she'll be talking about Sandy Hook Promise's mission and specifically how mental health fits into our mission and is such a vital approach into how we're looking at preventing gun violence before it happens. You'll also hear from Liz Atwell, who is going to talk about mental health awareness and reducing stigma. As May is Mental Health Month, we have a special call to action we're going to ask you as Promise Leaders to take. Many of you have already signed up for it by designating that you're willing to write a letter to the editor of your local paper to increase awareness around mental health. So we'll spend some time talking about that as well and answering your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Hockley, Managing Director with Sandy Hook Promise, and Dylan's mom. So before I do that, if you're calling in, if you can mute yourself so that it's easier to hear Nicole, that would be great. And then we will have time at the end of the webinar to take questions. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Nicole Hockley. I'm one of the managing directors here and mother of Dylan, who was killed at Sandy Hook on December 14th, 2012. Thank you so much for joining our webinar tonight. It's always exciting to be able to hear from people from around the country and people who are doing fantastic things in their community as a Promise leader and also as a concerned community member trying to do something good. So as we just start thinking about just reminding everyone really who is Sandy Hook Promise. We are a national organization. We're a nonprofit that was founded and led by several family members such as myself and Mark Barden, who lost loved ones in the tragic mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Our entire reason for being is that we protect children and adults, but our focus is children. We protect children from gun violence by providing and delivering research-based mental health and wellness and gun safety programs and practices. And just expanding on that a little bit in terms of that mission. So if we can just go back one slide, please. Thanks. This is all about, as Paula said, about getting ahead of the violence before it takes place. That's why the word gun is in parentheses there, because when we talk about our programs, you could take the gun out of gun violence, and the programs that we deliver are appropriate for preventing any violence. Our particular nexus is gun violence, but as we'll talk in a little bit more detail in a moment, the programs help everyone who has any sort of mental health and wellness issue. So why does Sandy Hook Promise exist? Quite simply, we exist so that no other parent or family has to experience the loss of their child through something preventable like gun violence, and we do believe that all gun violence is preventable. Our research has shown over the last few years that there are always signs and signals given off before an act of violence, and we truly know that if we learn how to know those signs and recognize them in advance, that we can intervene and help prevent tragedy. That kind of approach and thinking hasn't happened before in our country, so it's going to take time, but this is an approach that's very much needed. When we think about our mission, we talk a lot about mental health or a lack of mental wellness. Out in the media world, the idea of gun violence and mental illness are far too often joined and said that, and to the point that too many people start to think that mental illness is a cause of gun violence, and that's just not true. That is a myth and a piece of misinformation that we really have to educate people about. Mental illness itself, it's a very, very, very small percentage of people with mental illness that ever go on to commit an act of violence. They're much more likely to be the victim rather than the perpetrator. But as is in the case with Sandy Hook, we do know that when someone with mental illness has easy access to a firearm, it can result in a disaster. But it is more likely to be suicide by firearm, which is the outcome of that. So when we talk about mental illness, we're generally talking about suicide by firearm. What we prefer to talk overall when we think about prevention is about a lack of mental wellness. Lack of mental wellness is basically those coping skills, anger management, empathy, a lack of empathy, poor social development, and poor problem-solving skills that can lead someone to not respond appropriately in a position of conflict and instead act in a way that is making a bad decision, whether that leads to self-harm or harm towards others. So although less than 6% of individuals with a diagnosable mental illness ever commit a violent crime, we know that our approach and programs promoting mental wellness are working to promote positive self-identity and social emotional learning. We're providing people with the much needed coping skills and anger management, as well as empathy and problem solving. And that's really what our prevention programs focus on. So very quickly before I hand over to Liz, just as a reminder as to what our 4 programs are. And they're all around this idea of knowing the signs. How do we identify, intervene, and get access for people who are at risk of potentially having an issue that could result in self-harm or harm towards others. So our 2 adult programs are youth mental health first aid and safety assessment and intervention. Youth mental health first aid, where we teach adults, parents, educators, and administrators how to recognize the signs of an emerging mental health issue or crisis and get that person help. Safety assessment and intervention is where we teach a small 3 or 4 person multidisciplinary team within a school or youth organization how to assess every single threat that comes in, deal with an imminent threat, but more importantly, deal with the other threats by scratching the surface to find what's going on in that child's life that's causing them to act out in this way, and how can we make an intervention before the threat escalates. And you also are very familiar with our 2 programs for students, Say Something and Start with Hello. Say Something, which teaches teens and adolescents in particular how to recognize at-risk behaviors and warning signs and signals and threats within their peer group, particularly in social media, and say something to a trusted adult. And Start with Hello, where we foster a culture within a school of empathy and inclusion by really reducing the issue of social isolation, marginalization, and rejection. All these programs work together very holistically and in a comprehensive way to prevent violence by giving people the help they need before they ever get that far. So I'd like to introduce you now to Liz Atwell, who will take us through the next section. Liz is the Executive Director for Mental Health America of Northern Kentucky and Southwest Ohio. She's worked in the mental health and substance abuse services field as a licensed social worker for 23 years. Her professional areas of expertise include suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention, as well as first responder crisis intervention. Liz has 4 children, and she resides in Cincinnati. So, Liz, if you could take it from here, please.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you all for the invitation to be here with you this evening. I'm really excited because May is nationally recognized as Mental Health Month, and so it's wonderful to be here this evening and to be able to have the opportunity to talk with all of you and to certainly share something that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited to be with you in multiple levels this evening. I am a fellow Promise leader, so I'm happy to be here and be part of this wonderful group that's working across the country for a really, really meaningful purpose. I'm working really hard in my community, and I know that you are too. I'm fortunate enough to get to be the Executive Director for Mental Health America of Northern Kentucky and Southwest Ohio, but I'm also really, really, really proud to say that I have 4 spectacular children, and am just blessed to be able to have them. My kids, and you'll understand a little bit further in my talk why I bring them into this, but my kids are 23, 16, 13, and 5. So I have my hands very full most days between serving as the director of a mental health agency as well as raising them. I want to share just a little bit about my story and kind of my journey. And about, I guess around 23 years ago, I started my first position working in the social services field. And I went to school to be a social worker because growing up I had always really wanted to work with people. And when I describe kind of my purpose or my calling, I always felt like I needed to really care for people and care about people in a very deep and intentional way. And somehow, after completing my schooling, I ended up in the mental health and substance abuse disorder field. And I always tell people this is not a field that I chose, but rather I really feel like it chose me. And I know that even as my career furthers, that is definitely the case. In 1998, I was fortunate to join Mental Health America as a health educator, and really that was my first opportunity to celebrate what we call Mental Health Month. So I want to share a little bit about Mental Health America so you can get a flavor for what we do and kind of why we've been asked, I think, to join you on the call this evening. But Mental Health America was founded in 1909 as a grassroots advocacy organization. The symbol of our organization is a bell, and you can actually go online and see the bell. It weighs about 300 pounds. During the early days of mental health treatment, asylums often restrained people who had mental illnesses with iron chains and shackles around their ankles and wrists. But with better understanding and treatment, this cruel practice eventually stopped. And in the early 1950s, Mental Health America went around the country and collected all the chains and the shackles that they could from the asylums. And they melted them down into the symbol of hope, which is our mental health bell. And one of the things that I think is so awesome about the bell is it's inscribed with this message. It says, "Cast from the shackles which bound them, this bell shall ring out hope for the mentally ill and victory over mental illness." And I think that, that message continues to be so important in our lives today. We have hundreds of Mental Health America affiliates working around the country. Again, I'm just fortunate to be the director in Northern Kentucky and Southwest Ohio. We're dedicated to helping Americans achieve wellness by living mentally healthier lives. So our work is driven by our commitment to promote mental health really as a critical part of overall wellness, including prevention, early identification, early intervention, integrated health, behavioral health, and other services for individuals who need them. And we always have recovery as a goal. We very much rely on that word recovery because we know treatment does work and recovery is possible. In my work at Mental Health America, I've played many roles and I've had a variety of positions. But things really changed for me around 2002, and I like to refer to it kind of as the first twist in my journey, because I really believe life is a journey. And in 2002, my dad died from cancer. He was 54, and I happened to be pregnant with my third child and in the process of building a home. And these large-scale changes in my life created extreme anxiety for me, the kind of anxiety that keeps you in your house and not able to do the things that the regular person can do. I continued to work, but I think that it was at that moment that I started to personally understand what it meant to live a life filled with anxiety. My next twist came probably around 2006 and 2007. My daughter began experiencing clinical depression, and she used cutting as an outlet for her pain. And also in 2007, my son was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome, and I would really describe him at that time as an explosive child. He was very misunderstood and just very difficult, I think, to raise at that time. Over the years, both my daughter and my son have struggled, and the impact of their mental illness definitely has been felt by all of our family members. I think at this time, over these years, that's when I became a family member of someone with mental illness, and my work twisted and took on new meaning. So I wasn't just working for the community anymore. I began working for my children and for our family. This journey became very personal. Again, this is why I think that the work chose me. I didn't choose it. Can you advance to the next slide? So I'd like to talk a little bit about stigma, because this is really important, I think, in the work that we're all collectively doing. Stigma is a large part of our journey. 3 out of 4 people with a mental illness report that they've experienced stigma. Stigma is a mark of disgrace that sets a person apart. When a person is labeled by their illness, they are seen as part of a stereotyped group. My children have felt the stigma, and I've felt the stigma. The times where our life was at the most difficult, dealing with a child who was hospitalized, there wasn't anyone who brought us a casserole. There wasn't a Facebook post that said, here's what we're going through. That stigma prevents those things from happening in most families. People with serious mental illness are challenged doubly. On one hand, they struggle with the symptoms and disabilities that result from the disease, and on the other, they're challenged by the stereotypes and the prejudice that result from misconceptions about mental illness. But as a result of both, people with mental illness are robbed of the opportunities that define a quality of life, things like good jobs, safe housing, satisfactory health care, and affiliation with a diverse group of people. Stigmas about mental illness seem to be widely endorsed by the general public. A media analysis of film and print have identified 3. People with mental illness are homicidal maniacs who need to be feared. They have childlike perceptions of the world that should be marveled, or they're responsible for their illness because they have weak character. And we know these are not true, yet they're still seem to be a very prevalent thought in the general public. Stigmatizing attitudes are not limited to mental illness. However, the public seems to disapprove persons with psychiatric disabilities significantly more than persons with related conditions such as physical illnesses. Severe mental illness has been likened to drug addiction, prostitution, and criminality. I think we've kind of covered that, I think, when Nicole was talking before. But the behavioral impact that results from this public stigma may take 4 forms, and those are withholding help, avoidance, coercive treatment, and segregated institutions. So basically, stigma prevents people from seeking help early on. Think about this. When we think about cancer, heart disease, or diabetes, we don't wait years to treat them. We don't insinuate that they caused their illness or that they are weak people. When people are in the first stage of those diseases, we try to immediately reverse their symptoms. So what are we waiting for with serious mental illnesses? Oftentimes we're waiting until things are just too bad. More and more children are being diagnosed with mental illness. And so I wanted to bring up a study. It's called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Childhood experiences, both positive and negative, have a tremendous impact on future violence, victimization, and perpetration, and lifelong health and opportunity. Adverse childhood experiences have been linked to risky behaviors like smoking, alcoholism, drug use, chronic health conditions like obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, low life potential including graduation rates, academic achievement, and lost time from work and early death. So why am I bringing up this adverse childhood experience? Again, because we can prevent them. And if we can prevent them, perhaps we can improve the health and the well-being of our next generation of adults. We can reduce the number of children who make a suicide attempt. We can reduce the number of children who are self-medicating through alcohol and drugs and those type of things. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Mommy.
So I want to introduce you to this Before Stage 4 platform, and this is something that was developed by Mental Health America at the national level, and I think it really speaks volumes to where we're at right now and where we need to go. So in my opinion, if I'm driving the car, I'm going to say we're going to intervene before Stage 4. So we're going to focus on prevention and early intervention. Earlier I mentioned not waiting until Stage 4 to treat cancer, or waiting until someone is in a complete emotional crisis or has made a suicide attempt. That's all waiting until Stage 4. There's so many things that we can do prior to that to help individuals. 50% of Americans will meet the criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition at some point in their life. Half of those people will develop that condition by the age of 14. So breaking down stigma and helping the community learn how to prevent adverse childhood experiences, as well as learn the early signs and symptoms of mental illness, really can change the trajectory. The cost of waiting is huge, and I'll give you two examples. We estimate an average hospitalization for someone who's staying on a behavioral health unit with an average stay of about 7.2 days costs about $15,317,000. And we know that incarcerating an individual for a year is estimated to be almost $32,000. And we also know that when someone dies, the cost of that is not measurable. So if there's so many things that we can do to intervene before stage 4 and help individuals who need it. I also just would like to say along those lines that one of the tools that I think that Sandy Hook Promise has wrapped their arms around is mental health first aid, and that is one of the things that we can do with this before stage 4 approach. We can become educated and learn the early warning signs and know the symptoms and know how to get people to the help that they need. Next slide, please. So I'd like to encourage you to do what I'm doing. There's so much that we can do. We can educate ourselves and we can educate the people around us. These small changes can add up and really make the difference that, that our country needs. There is a movement happening, and I don't know if everyone on the call is aware of that, but when I talk about a movement, I can actually think of several. So these movements are Mental Health America has created a movement over several decades to really take things to the next level, to educate people, to bring awareness around mental health issues. Sandy Hook Promise is doing the same thing. What we're doing is spreading good information, solid programming, and really strengthening the core of our country. I would like to encourage you all to be a lifeline. You never know who you might help. It could be your child, it could be my child. You just have to be a caring person in the right place at the right time. I will share my journey is moving forward, and it still continues to be full of twists and turns. But the one thing that I can tell you is, just like Nicole, I will not give up. I will continue to use my professional and my personal life to be the difference and to create this culture of kindness where children can grow into responsible and respectful adults, where your mental illness doesn't define you, and where you're valued for every part that makes you who you are. That's my commitment, certainly to my children, but also to my community. So I'm so thankful to be able to have the evening with all of you. And I can turn it over. Paula, are you handling questions? Or?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. And I would just like to pick up where Liz left off about taking action. We hope that you will join Sandy Hook Promise for our special Promise Leader Call to Action this May. This is a call to action that we are only extending to our Promise Leaders. And we're encouraging you to share your voice within your community. As Promise Leaders, you provide a credible local voice in your community that can continue to reduce the stigma that Liz talked about and build the awareness that is so important, that lets people, gives them permission to go and get help, if they're experiencing a mental health crisis. And that together keeps communities and people healthier and safer. Our call to action week is May 16th to 20th, and we really welcome you to submit a letter to the editor to your local paper that week. We are trying to make it as easy as possible. So if you haven't yet signed up, you can at sandyhookpromise.org/letter. And once you sign up to participate in the May Promise Leader call to action, you'll be directed to a sample letter to the editor that you can use. You're free to use this template or customize it as you would like. After you submit your letter, please share your results back to us. We would love to hear, especially if your letter gets published, to be able to share that on our social media and other materials. And please, if you have questions at any time, don't hesitate to reach out to us at promiseleader@sandyhookpromise.org. And before we open it up for questions, I want to share just a couple brief tips to keep in mind as you're writing your letter to the editor. The first is to keep it brief. Follow your paper's requirements. A lot of papers will tell you once you get to their letter to the editor, their editor page, how many words your letter to the editor should be. Please follow their requirements as they usually don't print anything that's longer than that. Also, we really encourage you to try for the bigger publications, those papers in your state or city where a lot of people are reading them to reach a lot of people. But at the same time, don't forget about the smaller community papers or the weeklies, as that's a really good place to build awareness as well. Please, if you're so inclined, paint a personal picture, tell a story about why this issue is so important to you, why it's important for you personally to reduce stigma, to build awareness, or why you're involved with Sandy Hook Promise. And then last but certainly not least, we ask you to keep your letter positive. As they're positive, they'll help continue the conversation and keep the conversation going. So we're going to pause now. If you have a question for Liz, Nicole, or the letter to the editor, or about the letter to the editor call to action, you can ask your questions now by typing in your name in the GoToMeeting box, and then Sarah will call on you or read your question.
Excellent. Doesn't look like we have any questions yet. I see one of you is hosting a youth mental health first aid. It looks like Rorik, you said you're working to bring a youth mental health first aid training into your community college in Middletown, Connecticut. So, if you need any help with that, that's awesome that you're doing that, and really excited to hear that. Other than that, we haven't had any questions yet. So again, if you want to type into the chat box and feel free to ask us anything about this webinar or any of the Sandy Hook Promise programs, we'd be more than happy to answer. Okay, at this time I'm going to open the phone line. So in case you're not sure how to type into the chat box, you're more than welcome to feel free to speak up and ask any questions that you might have.
Either, this is Nicole, either we have a very shy group of Promise leaders on the phone, or I think because Liz was so comprehensive in what she talked about, and Paula was so clear on the actions to take for the call to action week. Oh, we just saw a comment from Paul.
I have a question, if I can be heard.
Yes. Absolutely. Please give
Hi,
us
I'm Sabrina, and I live in Lodi, California. And thank you so much for
inviting me to join. I just had a question because I'm trying to get the Say Hello or Start with Hello program involved in just our 38 local schools. And I was just wondering if you have any great ideas of how to pitch the program, how it's different from like the Fill Your Bucket program or programs that schools have used in the past. Like,
I didn't uncover them. You want me to uncover them? I'll uncover them.
Hello?
Yeah. Nicole or Paula, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Thanks for your question, Sabrina. As Nicole mentioned, Sandy Hook Promise, we do have 4 no-cost programs that all foster how to build stronger mental wellness. And Start with Hello is one of them. It teaches young people, grades 2 through 12, empathy, compassion, how to identify signs of chronic social isolation in their classrooms, and then how to reach out to build an inclusive, connected classroom, how to reduce isolation, and how to prevent violence before it happens. For your Start with Hello program, would encourage you to visit our website, sandyhookpromise.org/prevention_program. There's a one-pager on there that you can download that has talking points and more information about it. And also, Sabrina, if you want to email us, you can email us either at programs@sandyhookpromise.org or promiseleader@sandyhookpromise.org, and we can set up time to talk to you on the phone and walk through and help you prepare to make your pitch or your presentation to your local school. But thank you so much for bringing that. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll push my mute button.
Thank you, Sabrina. We do have a question from Susan Cook, who asked, what is the status of the Mental Health Reform Act?
I'll take that one. That's a great question, Susan, and thank you for bringing it up. It is, we're in a holding pattern right now on the Mental Health Reform Act. It was approved with 100% bipartisan support from the Senate Health Committee this past March. And I know Senators Murphy and Cassidy are working hard to get this on the floor in the Senate. I think Representative Tim Murphy's House companion bill is struggling a little bit more in the House right now, but I think at the moment the strategy is for the House to follow the Senate's lead. There were 2 articles that I read about in Politico just this week, or it might have even been today in all honesty, that are talking about the current stall of the Mental Health Reform Act in Congress. There are concerns that some of the verbiage might be changing. There's still ongoing conversations with Senator Cornyn from Texas around some of his language in his proposed bill as well. But we remain very firmly committed to seeing this through and to passing the finish line and getting it signed into law. And we are cautiously optimistic. Out of any of the current mental health legislative pieces on the being proposed on the floor right now, this has the most potential of getting through, and we're working it really hard. I hope that answers your question, Susan.
Excellent. Thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Susan, for your question. The next question that we have is from, and sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, is from Nisa Gonzalez, and she wants to know how we as a community can do more, especially at the school level.
I think the Youth Mental Health First Aid program that Nicole and Liz mentioned is a really great program that trains people who work with youth, so educators, administrators, coaches, many people within the school system, how to identify and recognize the signs of a mental health crisis in a young person, and then intervene to get that young person help. That's a really great way to reduce stigma among educators within the school system and make sure that they are prepared to be able to intervene, make a referral, and get that young person help so that it can be treated as soon as possible. In addition, I would encourage you, especially in the school system, to bring in any of our 4 programs that help increase mental health wellness and increase kids and people who work with kids looking out for each other and supporting each other, that really builds those mental wellness skills that Nicole was talking about: problem solving, empathy, compassion.
Excellent. Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Nisa, for your question. The next question is from Lori Snyder, and she wants to know, she said, our local television station has a weekly community affairs program, and they're interested in bringing in Sandy Hook Promise program. She wants to know if we can assist with this. It's a 30-minute program.
Happy to have a look at that. Lori, if you could email details on that to probably to Judith Coffey, so judith.coffey@sandyhookpromise.org, and Judith can ensure that that gets to me and Alexa, and we'll have a look. But if there's a way for us to help, you can be sure that we'll do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. Our next question comes from Rorik Kennedy, and they would like to know, is Sandy Hook Promise creating any new programs in the future, or are the 4 programs going to remain the core of our mission? Will this be changed or expanded upon in the future?
Great question, Rorik. At the moment, the 4 programs are going to be the core of our umbrella position of knowing the signs. We're always going to keep an eye out on other regional or national efforts that fit within this, but right now there's so much to do in terms of education and awareness on how to recognize those signs and how to get people help. So we're focusing all our efforts there. That said, who knows what the future may hold, but this is going to be our area of focus. In terms of changing or expanding the programs, I can absolutely see that happening. We're always taking feedback from leaders and our Promise presenters, as well as from the schools and community organizations in which we train. And we're actually working right now on making some expansion on Start with Hello to do more curriculum activities that align it with standards and make it easier for educators, and also adding in a module that's specifically on conflict resolution. They're just starting to work on that right now. And in terms of Say Something, we're working on, when we first developed Say Something, we always had an end goal of having a holistic service model at the end of it that provided, taking that action that says tell a trusted adult, taking that even further for people that wanted to remain anonymous. And I think over the next few months, we'll be announcing something exciting that we've been working on there to expand the Say Something program to allow for kids to be able to report anonymously well, but still be incredibly effective. And in terms of youth mental health first aid, the National Council for Behavioral Health is always working to improve on that program, so there could be changes over time. And safety assessment intervention, we're working very hard with Dr. Dewey Cornell, who developed the program, to ensure that that is even easier to implement and learn and sustain. So we're always going to be making improvements, and if you have any feedback yourselves, and please send it through to promiseleader@sandyhookpromise.org, and because we only want to keep improving.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you, Rorik, for your question. The next question comes from Debbie Goldblum, and Debbie would like to know about the lack of resources for treatment. She says, many times families are frustrated with where to turn, especially as their child ages out of the system. Can someone on the panel speak to this?
Liz, I feel like you might be the best one. Do you want to take this question?
Sure. I think it's really complex, and you know, our mental health system has been severely underfunded for a really long time, and that's why I think when we are out there looking for treatment and there's a waiting list, or doesn't appear that there's anything available to help, why we have to continue to advocate and to share personal stories and look for legislation that will allocate more resources. There's also a very much a severe shortage of psychiatry services in our country. And if you look at the field of psychiatry, we lose psychiatrists because of low reimbursements, and they're just one of the lower paid medical positions in the field, yet they're doing very complex and demanding work. So I think it's definitely a complex problem that is impacting everyone around the country. There are some areas of the country that seem to fare better and have access to more resources. I can say just from a personal standpoint, there oftentimes have been me trying to advocate for my children and look for services, and I have had to really be persistent and in many cases do a lot of legwork on my own in order to get my children into the care that they needed. But we do have a real lack of resources, and we really do need people to advocate for the resources that that are really lacking.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Debbie, for your question. Some of these questions that I'm skipping over is because they're specific Promise Leader questions, and as Nicole mentioned, our Promise Leader coordinator, Judith Coffey, would be more than happy to answer any specific community-related questions that you have. And her email address is promiseleader@sandyhookpromise.org. And the next question comes from Mandy Weinman. And Mandy would like to know, since the 4 core programs will be the 4 that were talked about, she would like to know what is happening with Keep It Safe and Secure.
Great question. At the moment, Keep It Safe and Secure is not a program. It's a set of guidelines. So we're not ready to expand on that into a full program just yet, but we could do that in the future. We've been working on recruiting an advisory council of gun owners to help us develop that program, but it's going to be a little bit of a slower burn just because there is so much demand right now for our 4 Know the Signs programs that really the vast bulk of all of our resources and people are going into those 4 programs. So at the moment, Keep It Safe and Secure is going to remain as a set of guidelines, but in future could become a fully fledged program in its own right.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Mandy, for your question. Mandy had one last question, and then I think we'll cut it off there, if that's okay with everyone. And Mandy's second question was, are there plans to tap onto the Promise Leaders to lead any of the programs as volunteers?
Great question, Mandy. So as Promise Leaders, there's a couple different ways. To tap into your network. If you have a relationship with people in your school system or in a youth serving organization, to meet with them and introduce our programs as a way to get our programs, into your community. We've had a lot of really powerful stories of Promise Leaders, reaching out to their friends and meeting with, school staff who then agrees to adopt Say Something or Start with Hello. In particular, if you're looking for more of an opportunity to deliver programs, we do occasionally recruit for Promise presenters, and we'll make sure that if we're doing it in your area to let you know and let you know how you can apply. But both of our youth programs, Say Something and Start with Hello, are designed to be self-led. We had a wonderful story. It's profiled on our Promise Leader Facebook page just yesterday of a Promise Leader who worked with her son to deliver the Say Something program in their high school. And actually the day after they presented the program, one of the students who was trained went to go talk to a guidance counselor about her friend who was contemplating suicide. And so if you're interested in leading those within your community, we can make sure that you have all the information you need, the presentation, the educator's guide, the student's guide to actually deliver a Say Something or Start with Hello program to a school or youth organization in your community. And if you'd like any more information, please email us at promiseleader@sandyhookpromise.org, and we can share, set up some time to chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Paula. And I think that will conclude the end of our question and answer portion of the webinar. I appreciate everyone's questions. I think they were really, really well thought out. And again, like Paula said, if you do have any questions, I'm going to type it in the chat box here, but be sure to connect with Judith Coffey, the Promise Leader Coordinator, at promiseleader@sandyhookpromise.org. And I'm going to pass it over to Paula to close us out.
In closing, we included some websites that we would encourage you to visit if you have more questions about mental health, mental wellness, reducing stigma, or our programs. The first website listed is actually Liz's organization, Mental Health America of Northern Kentucky, Southwest Ohio. Also, NAMI has some really great resources, and especially this month for May Mental Health Month, have tips and ideas there as well. And we encourage you to always visit sandyhookpromise.org to learn about the 4 programs that we talked about tonight and just how we're working through our Promise Leaders and through schools and communities to increase mental health and mental wellness and reduce violence. And want to conclude by telling you, thank you for joining us on this call tonight. Thank you for your questions, for your time and attention. We know it's not always easy to jump on a call in the evening or right after work, but I think it illustrates how committed and how passionate our Promise Leaders are, and we thank you for that. And sincerely hope that you'll join us for our Promise Leader Call to Action letter to the editor writing this next week.
All right, wonderful. And again, this call was recorded, so we'll try to get that, shared to all of you and up on Facebook in the next couple of days. And just thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and end the webinar at this point, but I think you have all the information that you need, and just appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.